Hi, my name's Terry McCosker, and I'd like you to join me as we look at how we monetise soil carbon with a brief look at the Kyoto Protocol and the carbon game itself.
How is soil carbon traded? At the end of our last talk, we talked about Kyoto being a linear system or a linear approach to the carbon issue. And when we move into agriculture, it's cyclical. In other words, it revolves around the carbon cycle itself. There are two issues with carbon. The first is, do we offset or do we sequester? Most carbon schemes around the world are really about offsetting. In other words, we leave the CO2 in the atmosphere, but we reduce the amount that's going in. So for example, if we had a wind farm that supplies electricity which reduces the coal burnt in a power station, that's called an avoided emission. The other thing is sequestration. Sequestration, on the other hand, removes CO2 from the atmosphere, and the process for doing that is photosynthesis. And the carbon then becomes stored in the plant material, as in trees, or in the soil itself. So sequestration is the only way in which we actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Agriculture has the ability to do both. It has the ability to both sequester and to avoid emissions. However, and this is critical, not under most conventional farming systems which are net emitters. So for us to become sequesterers and avoiders in agriculture, we've really got to have a close look at how we run our farming systems. The examples of where we can reduce emissions are reduced fertiliser use, particularly nitrogen fertilisers, reduced electricity or fuel use, avoided deforestation, lower methane from livestock, etc. And we can only sequester essentially in two places, in soil carbon and in trees. If we're going to trade carbon, we need standards, and Kyoto has 4 key rules that are part of every carbon trading scheme. The first is additionality, and that means that carbon credits generated must be additional to business as usual. Secondly, there's permanence. Carbon credits must be a permanent removal or reduction of CO2 in the atmosphere. There should be no leakage. In other words, there's no point in reducing CO2 on this particular farm or this business here, but transferring it to another business. That doesn't actually affect the ecosystem at all. And any carbon to be traded must be independently verified by an auditor, and that basically says that it's real. The people that buy carbon credits, what are they looking for? Well, the first thing they're looking for is verification by an independent accredited organisation. And verification has to be against an acceptable standard. So in Australia, we've got the Carbon Farming Initiative, which is an acceptable standard. The Voluntary Carbon Standard and the Gold Standard are other examples of acceptable standards. Generally, carbon should be of a recent vintage, in other words, sequestered or avoided in recent history. Carbon must be maintained for the permanence period, and the science behind measuring and monitoring protocols must be able to withstand the highest level of scrutiny. And carbon credits are then registered on a registry so that they are traceable back to where they came from, which tells you what form of credit they are, who produced that credit, and who verified it. And there are essentially 2 markets in the carbon game. The first is companies that volunteer to buy non-compliant or even compliant carbon credits. That's called the voluntary market, and it's generally sourced by people who want to offset carbon for moral reasons or for marketing reasons. And the second market is the mandated or government-imposed market, such as a carbon tax or an emissions trading scheme. And that's where the government forces emitters to pay for carbon emissions. What determines the value of carbon? Well, one way is that governments determine a price, and that's the mandated market. The second is the market perception of its quality. Soil carbon, for example, might trade anywhere from $40 a tonne down to 50 cents a tonne, depending on how well it was verified and how well it was measured, etc. And like any commodity, supply and demand will determine the value. So if demand outstrips supply, then the value of carbon credits will increase. Also, the standard used can also impact on the value of the carbon credits. So what we've had over a long period of time is what I call the carbon game. And in the farming industries, we've had this brick wall in front of us, but a carrot held out in front of us to say that, well, one of these days you might be able to make some money out of trading soil carbon. But there's been a great wall put in front of us that has prevented us doing that, and we've never been able to reach that carrot. But some things have started to change, and we've been able to smash a few holes in that brick wall in 2012 and 2013. Firstly, in Australia, we got the Carbon Farming Initiative legislated in late 2011. Secondly, Australia signed KYOTO 3.4 in 2013, which allows us to trade carbon internationally. We also developed the technology in 2012 and proved it up on a commercial scale that we can measure soil organic carbon very accurately over a large area. The development of methodologies has been progressing through 2012, 2013, and certainly we expect a soil carbon methodology to be available in Australia in 2014. Also, the new government in Australia in 2013 had started to change some of the perceptions around soil carbon in particular. So we'll talk some more about carbon trading and how we measure it in the next few sessions.